Awesome.
I remembered.
Drum up some stuff.
There we go. And here we are for another episode of Dualistic Unity Raw, Sunday edition. I get excited about Sundays, mostly because I have 2 days to just kind of fuck around and live my life. Friday, I hung out with my daughter. We went out to this great crepe place that I've never been to in town. I had this 4-berry crepe, and we walked by the waterfront. It was fucking awesome. Just kind of a time to do what life is really all about, to live, right? And then, Andrew, you posted some stuff to Instagram that got a bit of a rise out of people. And while I've been also creating clips from the podcast and trying to get those out there, everybody, if you're following us on TikTok or Instagram, you'd like to help out, check out those clips because they're good clips. It's funny, I don't often go back to old episodes, and so it's kind of cool to see how AI goes through an episode and goes, this is really interesting. It's like, that saved a lot of time. So yeah, we've been doing that on Instagram and TikTok on both of our accounts, as well as YouTube, shorts here and there. If you can go and check those out, tell us what you think of the clips, share the clips. That'd be really good. That'd be really helpful. But Andrew shared 2 clips. One, that they were both about cannabis and responsibility. More or less that while we are influenced by things, we ultimately have responsibility for how we respond to those influences. And nobody's saying that's black and white. Obviously, there's a learning spectrum and all of that. But it was just that point that we have a responsibility in how we respond, that we actually have the ability to modify our response to whatever it is that we're experiencing, even if it's just a little bit. And at the time, he was talking about the weather and how weather can often be used as an excuse. And I think that's the thing, is that, see, right there, I use the word as an excuse. It's not so much as an excuse. The weather affects you. If you're used to hot weather and you move somewhere cold, that's going to affect you. There's some change there. But the question is it the weather that's affecting you, or is it just your resistance to that change? And so I think that's the question so much. Is it's not to say that the weather doesn't affect you. It's to say that you have the ability to adapt to that change. You have the ability to modify your response to how the weather affects you, right? It's not to say that you have to go from it's winter, I hate winter, to winter's my favorite season. But you can move slightly away from I hate this, because that's a comparison-based mindset. You're basing that on your preferences, but your preferences are habitual. So you can modify your preferences or even just soften them. And what you'll find is that there is an opportunity to make the most out of the experience that you're having. I had a client who suffered from seasonal affective depression. Basically, every time it was fall or winter, she would get all bummed out because she was a summer person. She really liked going out, going to the beach, traveling to warm places, doing all that. And when the snow would fall and it would get all dreary and the leaves would need raking and gathering, and everything would start to kind of get gray, she would get really depressed about it. And she was talking to me, and what was funny was that over a couple of sessions, what I started to notice that it was always the same complaints. Like, she was always saying the same thing about why the weather bothered her. And it was always based on the same preferences that she missed, that she wasn't having those wants that weren't being fulfilled now that the weather had changed. And so instead of going like, let's just try and remove our attachment to summer, I just started asking her about things that she does like to do in the winter. I asked her if she likes hot chocolate. I liked her if she likes sitting underneath a warm blanket, or looking out at the snow falling. And after about an hour of talking about things that she really does like about winter, like the fact that there are less mosquitoes, for example, the fact that you get a little bit more time for self-reflection, the fact that there's just different things, there are different elements, but that it's so hard to appreciate those elements while you're staring at something else that you're like, but I like that. But I like that. It makes everything by comparison less. It diminishes your experience of what you're doing now. In fact, it makes it a negative by comparison to what you're perceiving to be the more positive. And so it's not that the weather doesn't impact you. It's that you still have an influence over how much it impacts you. You still have an influence over what you do with the impact as it's happening. Sure, you can feel depressed about the weather. Who hasn't? Who hasn't felt bummed out about the weather? Who hasn't felt a little upset that the summer was ending, or any of those seasons, whatever your preferences may be? The question is, do you sit there dwelling on it, or do you go and find something to do? Or do you go and or out of necessity, let's say you don't like fall and you have to go rake the leaves. There are things in that you can learn to enjoy. Hell, learn something about trees. All of a sudden leaves become really, really interesting, right? And this is it, is that nothing is set in stone. And somebody in response to your video actually said that, like, well, I think you guys are incorrect. I mean, I suffer from this every year, and I have developed certain strategies and coping mechanisms to make it less less hard on me, which was hilarious. I'm like, I think you just backed up her point, because that was the point. It's like, what if you continue to use those strategies? What if you continue to grow in that direction to the point where the season doesn't bother you at all? What you're making the assumption is that it's always going to bother you because it has right now. And how often do we do that? We're like, today dictates the rest of my life. We don't know that, but it's a good way of making sure it does.
Yeah, because all of this whole conversation, as uncomfortable as it's made people, and how much they've pushed back. And you can go to the video on Instagram, and it's like there's a lot of comments in there of people. But it's also important to keep in mind, and important for me to keep in mind too, that when all the comments are just people angry about the video, usually it's something polarizing, and the people who aren't angry about it don't take the time to comment. So that's super important to keep in mind. And for people who are commenting, who are like trying to back up their argument by saying that, oh, all these comments are negative. It's like the people who are not, who are actually recognizing it, who are willing to take responsibility, who are willing to take responsibility for things in their life, they're not commenting like great video. They just like it and move on, or share it or whatever. Like they're not spending time in the comment section, because this, like, these videos are not, they're not meant to be necessarily helpful or harmful. They're just recognitions, but they have the potential to be helpful if you're willing to look at it. And if you can take something and respond differently to it at all, to any degree, then it's not set in stone. It's not this thing that you are weighed down by and you have to live with for the rest of your life, like seasonal affected disorder, or whatever it is exactly. Like when you feel worse because of the weather and you think it's something, like you pin it on something. Even just thinking about it right now, if you put yourself in that and say, I have this, it's like set in stone all of a sudden. But if you can respond differently, if you can, be in winter when it's cold out, and just not gripe as much about it, like not think that this is this awful thing, and recognize that, oh, this is just the environment that I'm in right now. And you have the capacity to respond even a tiny bit differently, even just not keep telling yourself how much you hate it, not keep telling yourself how shitty it is, like, then it's not set in stone. And that's all that it is. And that will impact your experience. Like, of course, that has influence over your experience, because you're a component. Your response is a massive component of your experience. It's the environments are going to change. The environments are going to be different, but you always have the ability to make the situation more shitty by identifying with a certain disorder, saying I have no ability to respond differently, saying that I have no way of changing my situation at all by seeing things differently. Or you can make it a little bit less shitty by not fighting it so much, by not thinking that it shouldn't be happening. Like the phrase, as basic and kind of cliche as it is what it is so powerful. Like for so many things, you don't have to think that things should be different than they are. You don't have to think that your situation should be different than it is in order to respond to it. You don't have to think that you should be different than you are in any given moment. Like the biggest shifts happen when you just stop thinking you should be different. When you just stop thinking that the situation that you're in should be different. Like it is what it is. And that will change the situation. Even just realizing that, even just when you drop the idea that something should be happening differently than it is, it lifts a lot of the weight. Like so much of the weight comes from our fight about the thing that we're going through, our resistance to it, our thought that something should be different than it is. There's this ideal situation that you never actually get to. Even the example of the woman talking about, she loves summer, but not crazy about the mosquitoes. She hates winter, but appreciates that there's less mosquitoes. It's like that's something right there that's a little bit different. So it's not this objective, 100% terrible, awful thing that makes your life so much worse. And I think this ties into the conversation of good and bad, which I posted about on my story a little bit yesterday. And because I said that there is no objective good or bad, there is no objective right and wrong, because it implies this certainty about a thing. Like it implies this idea that I know with absolute certainty all of the impacts of this event. I know exactly how the future is going to go. I know everything about the entirety of the situation that this then impacts. Like in order to judge something as good or bad, you have to have a very, very limited siloed perspective of the situation, and think that it just exists in a vacuum on its own, separate from everything else. And so I put another Q&A up just because someone said something along the lines of, oh, there are some objectively good things and we should try to do that. And then I was like, I would love to hear some examples of some objectively good things. Like we so badly want there to be just something, just some guidebook, just some rule book, just something where I don't have to be sensitive and paying attention to my environment. I can just close my eyes and just do this, and then I'm good. And it's like, what the fuck kind of life is that? What the fuck kind of experience is that to just follow a guidebook, a rule book for your entire life? And so there was a couple comments in there that were like, oh, a cure for a disease. It's like, if you take that to the extreme and we cure all the diseases, we're dealing with overpopulation. Like, and another one was, oh, helping someone who needs it. It's like, that's not even that deep. Like that becomes enabling super quickly. I gave the example of a baby learning to walk. Like if a baby is learning how to walk and it keeps falling and hurting itself, it's like that's experiencing some pain. But if you just take away that pain and just, carry it everywhere or put it in a little stroller and drive it anywhere, it's never going to learn how to walk. Is that a good thing to take away that pain to help them so much? Like no one's going to say yes. Probably someone probably will, but almost no one will. It's like, okay, if that's the case, then it's not an objectively good thing to help someone like that. Even the elderly, like a couple are like, I got a number after that one that were like, uh, oh, well, to make someone who's dying's life more comfortable at the end is a objectively good thing. And it's like, even with that, like there's no certainty of anything. Like you don't know
Like
what's
anyone?
exactly. That's another part. Like, okay, you want to make Hitler's end of his life a little bit easier? It's like, well, no, because he's a bad person. Like, oh my goodness gracious. It's you can't judge things in silo just because something makes you uncomfortable. That doesn't make it bad. Like good and bad are it's like it's an incomplete barometer to measure something by. It doesn't exist as badly as we want there to be something that's good. It's just based on preference and your opinion and what makes you comfortable typically.
Yeah, out of if you were to look at assumption as a spectrum, um, good and bad or good and evil is basically the most superficial, right? It's just to look at something in terms of I like that, I don't like that. You know, I think that that's good for me. I don't think that that's good for me. I'm afraid of that. I really want that. That's basically what dictates good and bad. I mean, that's why some cultures, practiced cannibalism and other ones did not. And it's like, well, one of them's bad. I'm going to assume that you're going to say it's the one that you don't do. Right. And that's all it is ever, and it's just because nothing is as simple as that. We'd really like it to be. We'd really like it to be, as you said. But more often than not, we're just so caught up in trying to feel better that we're not actually making any arguments outside of, but that doesn't make me feel good. Which is why, again, Instagram is kind of so much fun for me because, see, I know that. And I know I spent a long time trying to avoid my responsibility in my own confusion. And so when people come on to Instagram in the comments section and they're just like, no, you're making this too simple. Why would you do this? Or two white guys, what do they know? Or what's your expertise? Or I experienced this, or I know people who've done this, especially with the cannabis thing and all that. And often I'll just point out that the argument is still about responsibility. Like, regardless of what you think is the exception to responsibility, your ability to respond differently still remains. It still remains, whether you like it or not. I mean, and that's the point, is that influence remains whether you want to admit it or not. And so often that is my response. And by the time we're done, I'm just a dick. And it's just because they get angry at me and I don't fucking care. You see, I don't care if they're angry at me. I expect them to get angry at me. Irresponsible people faced with responsibility get angry. And I know, because I did, right? No, none of us want to go, fuck, I'm doing this to myself. None of us want to do that. But it's the healthiest thing for us. And what's funny is that most people are so busy trying to feel better about themselves that they won't challenge you in your attempt to feel better about yourself. And so what often happens is people come into the Instagram feed, they expect to be able to leave a comment that's just abrasive and self-validating and then just leave. And it's like, well, you're here, you've engaged in conversation, I'm going to respond. And I'm going to respond in a way that is the truth. And while you're going to make it out like I'm trying to tear you down, pointing out that lashing out at us comes from a state of insecurity isn't an insult. See, that's not an insult. Pointing out that you want to blame something else for your state of mind, pointing out that it's irresponsible to do so, is not an insult. Pointing out irresponsibility and insecurity is not an insult. We all go through it. It feels like an insult because of the insecurity. And you give in to that feeling because of the irresponsibility. And that's it. And so the point is very simple, but nobody ever just sticks to it. And eventually everybody's just like, believe what you want to believe because it's unpleasant to go through. It's not unpleasant for me. I don't go out seeking it, but if you want to come to leave a comment on our discussion, then I'm going to respond. And how often, and I encourage you, go and check out the comment section because it's fun for a number of reasons, but often we'll get the response like, why do you have to keep replying to these? It's like, you engaged in conversation. One person, and this was probably my favorite this weekend, was you only reply to comments that agree with you or to comments that argue against you. And I just quoted that, and I said, I'm just going to let that sit. You just dwell on what you just said, because the whole issue is just you keep responding. You keep responding in a way that isn't what we want to hear, and nobody does that. And so you're the devil. And what's funny to me is that I know how many times I felt that way about people who genuinely were helping me later on in life. I came to realize that actually modified my path by giving me something that I just kept beating my face against. It's like going out and being obnoxious to people one day for no reason, just completely self-serving. And somebody comes up to you and go, you're kind of being a dick. And it's so off-putting because nobody will do that. Everybody's so worried about being liked. Everybody's so worried about how they're perceived. Almost nobody will come out of their way to just go up to you and honestly say, you're being a fucking douche. And when they do, it leaves this terrible taste in your mouth. It really bothers you. Maybe you suck it up. Maybe you lash out. Maybe you take your ball and go home. You throw a little tantrum. But that moment sticks. It sticks. And it sticks because you know they're being honest. And it was super uncomfortable. That shit doesn't happen enough because we're all so concerned about being liked. I don't give a fuck about being liked. See, I love you. I love everybody. I love them like I love myself. That has nothing to do with whether or not I'm fucking popular. There are a lot of things I do out of love for my child that don't make me her fucking favorite person when it's happening. That doesn't mean it's not important for growth. We're all in this together. If we're not helping ourselves towards clarity, then we're just keeping ourselves in confusion. You do that. I'm just going to be sitting here. If you don't want to talk to me, then don't talk to me. But if you talk to me, welcome to it. I'm not going to pull punches just because you don't like them. The question is, why don't you like them, other than the fact that you've just convinced yourself you're not strong enough to take them?
Yeah, because when something like that hits and sticks and leaves a bad taste, it's only because we know it. Like, and that's the bitch of it is the only reason that you get so frustrated, worked up, you lash out, maybe you throw a tantrum, maybe you sulk about it, is because you know there's truth behind it. Like if you didn't think that at all, it wouldn't stick in the same way. Like if you have some sort of reaction to a statement, almost always it's because you know it's something that you're doing and you're avoiding it. And like it's interesting how we always kind of, I don't know, at least for myself, when I get something pointed out, like it's something I know that I'm doing, and there's like an avoidance of wanting to look at it. And then it's like when it's out there, it's like, fuck yeah. And the only reason like both of us will be, it's not even aggressive, it's just the willingness to call something out, is because we do it to ourselves. Like it's because that's how I treat myself. Like when I'm getting caught up in something, it's like, oh yeah, I'm thinking about my fucking self, making an assumption about something that isn't even set in stone. Like it's not even a concrete thing. I'm just doing it because I want to know something. And that I'm experiencing consequences because of it. And it's this loop, but and when I catch it myself, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm doing that to myself. Oh, holy fuck, I'm doing a lot of things to myself. Oh man, I'm trying to be something and I don't have to. And it's not even for anyone's good. Even fucking self-doubt, like that one, even that, it's like you're not doing anyone any good by shitting on yourself, by judging yourself, by putting yourself down, by having doubt. Like you're not doing the world any good by holding yourself back about things. But recognizing that, it's not a fucking insult. Like if you catch yourself and notice yourself doing something, you don't immediately think, "Oh, I'm insulting myself." Like that wouldn't cross your mind. I don't think. I can't necessarily say that. It wouldn't cross my mind when I notice something in myself. It's the judgment, and even the flip side of recognizing that. It's the judgment that brings you down, but the recognition that you're judging yourself and that is having an impact on your life is not an insult. It's not a judgment about yourself. It's just a recognition, because it doesn't mean anything about your value inherently. Like that's the difference, is pointing out a mechanism of behavior, pointing out a behavior pattern, pointing out a response that you don't have to have, is not a fucking insult. Of course it's not an insult. It's just a recognition. That's all that it is. And the only reason we are willing to talk about this openly, or willing to talk about, you know, the idea of yourself, the assumptions that we make about ourselves, just being figments of our imagination, just being something that weighs us down, that adds weight, is because I notice it in myself. Like that's why I'm willing to talk about it. Like I'm almost always just talking to myself. Like I'm really, like, the things that I talk about are just things that I'm going through. And it's funny when people will ask, or even, bring things up like, oh, I'm still like kind of going through stuff a lot. Like I'm still kind of going through shit. It's like, welcome to reality. Like welcome to experience. Like to think, and it cracks me up when people make an assumption that, you know, I don't know, that we have everything figured out, that I don't experience going through shit. Like, fucker, it's all the time. And I just do stuff anyway. Like I do stuff despite it. Like I don't let the feelings stop me as much. That's the only thing. Like I had someone comment on a video I just did. I was just walking through the airport and I was like, something I really don't want to do right now? Prop my phone up and sing. And And so I was like, yeah, but why don't I want to do that? I have a really, really uncomfortable feeling inside of me when I think about doing that. Even just filming myself right now, like it was just a lot of discomfort. And there's times where I don't feel that amount of discomfort doing something like that. I'm just like, fuck it, whatever. But in that moment, I was like, it really doesn't feel comfortable. And I was like, all right, so I'll do that. And someone commented, like, I wish I had your confidence. It's like, you do. You do. It's not a feeling. It's not this thing. It's like I felt brutal going into that. I was like, this is so tough. I wandered around for like 10 minutes, kind of like, oh, what's a spot I can do this, that there's gonna be people. But also didn't want it to be obnoxious where I was like in the way and like, oh, I gotta do this for myself to prove this thing. I was like, I'm just feeling kind of uncomfortable, so I'm gonna do this. And anyone could do that because it's not a feeling, it's not a thing where it's like, all right, I'm finally feeling confident and now I'm going to do it. It only hits and shifts because I felt so uncomfortable going in it. I felt so unconfident going into it. There was zero confidence going into that whatsoever. I just felt very uncomfortable and I just did it. Like, yeah, it's going to be something. It's going to be what it is. I'm going to feel fine afterwards. And because there is a component, I think that's something that I've downplayed is the component of the application. And it's not to say that I don't apply this stuff. Like we're talking on here all the time. We're doing shit all the time, doing things that, years ago I would have been way too uncomfortable to even try. But there is a side of it. Like you can't just talk about it. You can't just go around talking about these types of things. Like there is a reality of the application, but at the same time, there isn't. And I know it's not like there isn't anything you have to do to prove anything to yourself, but there is a balance and there is, if there is something you're avoiding because it feels uncomfortable, it's just taking an honest look at why it makes you uncomfortable and why you're avoiding it. And you don't have to do it necessarily, but you also don't have to think that you shouldn't do it because you don't have to prove anything. It's like, fuck it, I'm going to do it. And why not? And you'll learn something and you'll probably shift and grow. And, next time around, maybe that discomfort won't be quite as strong. And it's just doing it for you. It's just doing it for you. And that's something else that I'll get into in a sec. But yeah, it's funny when people think that, oh, these guys, they seem so clear and they must not go through anything and they must not, maybe they don't experience thoughts in their mind. And dude, I'm going through whirlwinds all the time. It's just riding it out and not thinking that there's anything wrong with any type of experience or discomfort that we experience.
Yeah, or any way of acting necessarily. I mean, that's kind of the whole thing. Like so often, because again, people get that idea of who we are based on, I guess, the assumption of the content. Because sometimes it's people who don't even watch the podcast, but they'll be watching on Instagram and they'll be like, well, what happened to all of this being love? And it's like, who the fuck said everything is love? Like nobody here. I think you're in the wrong room. Like that kind of thing. And so it's that, like I will just fuck with people. And I was mentioning this yesterday. I had somebody who decided he was upset because Andrew was talking about cannabis and saying like, there's a portion of responsibility here. Take responsibility. And he was upset that you were making it sound too easy. His whole point was that Andrew needs to respect this plant, which is a sacrament to God. And there was a lot of like weight on it. And he's like, you're making this out to be a joke. And I said, the only joke here is that you think this has anything to do with a fictional God. And then he just lost it after that. He was quite upset. And he started going around and he started just trash talking and commenting and doing all of this stuff. And at one point he writes, he's like, oh yeah, no, you're so enlightened. You're so aware of unity. It's like, why do you think I'm sitting here with you? I'm sitting here because none of that matters. I'm not judging you. You're the one making assumptions about me. He's like, well, do you experience love? It's like, this is it. Love isn't saying the shit that you like, right? Like people have this idea that, oh, well, you don't deal with any of this. And thus, which is an extension, you don't talk like this. And it's like, no, if somebody comes up and they're a douche, I'm going to say you're being a douche. It's like, is that loving? Yeah. I mean, I would say honesty is loving. I would say honesty is more loving than people pleasing in a big way. And it's so loving, in fact, that you're willing to put your own preferences, your own wants and desires on the line. Because in being honest, you're actually taking a risk that this person may just fuck off and leave you. Right? That's love. Right? And if you're not willing to take that risk, then the question is, who is it you think you love?
Yeah, we have this very convoluted idea of love. It's like we we tend to think that love and comfort go hand in hand. It's like, yeah, but if you're holding on to something that's fucking you up, and even the willingness to just be that person that says it and kind of know that it's not, or it's likely not going to be responded to in, at least in the near future, in a polite, comfortable way. Like there's going to be pushback. Like that's not comfortable for anyone necessarily, but there's a willingness to do so. Like there's a willing, it's not just this, like, I don't like this convoluted gratification where, oh, you just enjoy fucking with people and pointing things out to them that they're doing that are potentially harming them. That's all you're really doing. Like it's not this thing that, like, I necessarily get much enjoyment out of it. I think the experience of it and like the whole situation of it there's absolutely some humor in it when, you point something out that someone's doing, they're like punching themselves in the face and you just like, you know, grab their fist and you're like, hey, you don't have to keep doing that. You don't have to do that anymore. You don't have to do that as much as you do. And they're like, stop. Let me live how I want to live. Let me believe what I want to believe. It's like, I'm not saying that you shouldn't. I'm just saying that you don't have to. That's all. And even the thought of being able to see things a little bit differently, like there's I don't know, pushback against that because there's a comfort in the familiar just because it's familiar for no other reason whatsoever, despite it being this potentially, I don't know, very, very harmful action. So there isn't a comfort in being honest with people. And there is, as you said, a risk to someone responding however they're going to respond, despite your honesty and love that you're expressing towards them. Like the whole concept of the Hallmark love, lovey-dovey, like, oh, live together forever in happiness and everything is sunshine and rainbows all the time. Like it's love isn't what you think that it is. It's just acting, I don't, with through seeing yourself in someone and treating someone how you treat yourself in a sense. And so if you're harsh with yourself and that's where you catch yourself doing things, like it's that's going to be how it plays out with other people, and there isn't anything not loving about it. Like pointing out a behavior pattern that's harming someone it's certainly not hateful. Like to think that it's hateful is kind of hilarious.
I think there's a caveat there. I think it's where it comes from, right? Like we make content pointing out that there are certain habits and thoughts and patterns that we can get into that are self-destructive, or rather that have a consequence, and we do that. We're not going out of our way to find people who are making content going, yeah, and getting all in their face about it and getting all upset about it, because that doesn't do anything. Like we know that. But if we thought that we were trying to change the world and that this was really important, we had to get out there and change people's minds, and that'd be a different place. It's coming from a different place there, right? Like I'm not going to go out of my way to tell someone you're hurting yourself. But if I'm talking about how we hurt ourselves and somebody comes in, they're like, no, well, then I'm going to get into the conversation. Right. And that's where they get upset, because then they're like, well, you're making this too simple. It's like, you're the one who walked into the conversation. If you're uncomfortable with the conversation, that's on you. Right. But that's the thing, is that the attitude isn't, you need to hear this because I think it's important for you. It's, this is important to me and I'm going to talk about it. And if you happen to be, dumb enough to come into the conversation just to try and prove yourself, it's going to be uncomfortable for you. Right. But I'm not going out of my way to tell anybody anything. And I think that's the point. That's why it's so lighthearted. That's why when they get upset with me, I don't get upset in kind, because it's a great chance to practice responsibility, but it's also a really good chance to show empathy. Like, there's no reason to get upset that somebody's hurting themselves. There's no reason to get upset about it unless you're still upset with yourself for doing it.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of just like an example in terms of being willing to have the conversation, but not going out of your way to do it. It's like if you were at the gym and you saw someone doing something that's not, the optimal way of doing it. And if you were to go up to every person and tell them like, "Hey, you should do that. You should do that differently." Like they didn't ask and it might be a variation because they have an injury or something. And to go around, it's just like it's very self-validating in terms of how you see yourself and how you need to see yourself, and so it's not even about the other people. And but on the flip side, if someone comes up to you and they're like, "Hey, I have a question about this," like being willing to respond. And another kind of similar example is there was a at the gym I went to in New York, I was doing I think it was like a leg press or something, and he just came up to me like I had my headphones in, was not didn't ask for anything. He was like one of the personal trainers there. And he told me that I should be doing it differently than I was. Like, hey, you actually want to change it here. And like, I know workout and body mechanics, and there was a specific reason. I knew what he was trying to tell me to do, but there was actually a different mechanism of the way I was doing it. And so I just explained that to him. And I was like, "Oh, I appreciate it, but I'm actually doing this because it's targeting this more. And there's actually more of a response with this muscle and blah, 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 blah." And he just kind of like, I don't know if he was necessarily butthurt, but he was kind of a little bit taken aback. And he was like, "Oh, all right." And he just seemed kind of like I deflated his sort of big egotistical balloon of being the trainer and the guy who knows everything. But I didn't say it in a, "Oh, you actually have no idea what you're talking about, and I'm doing it because of this." I just explained it back to why I was doing the thing that I was doing. I could have just said, "Oh, thank you," but I don't know. I wanted to talk about it and explain it to him because then he can possibly learn something as well. But it was just kind of funny how like it makes me wonder if he was even trying to be helpful, and I'm sure he was, but there was also an undertone of, "I know this and you don't, and I know better than you because I have this like job or whatever." And that's where he, I don't know, maybe gets his value and whatever. But it's interesting when people go out of their way to do it. So yeah, it's always funny when people are like, "Why do you keep responding and commenting?" It's like, this is my fucking account. I'm getting a notification every single time you respond, and there's a bunch of people who are reading this comment section. And so there's a conversation to be had. And to think that you can just go on someone else's video, comment something, get responses that question your point of view, that have a lot of validity and make a lot of sense, is funny. To think you can just go around and no one responds, and you're just putting it out there because you want to feel better. And then when someone gets back to you, you're like, "Oh shit, I kind of have to think about this differently. Why are you still respond? Don't you have anything better to do with your life? Like, why do you keep responding?" And this is blah blah blah. And it's like, this, like, do you know what's happening right now? Like, you keep coming back to the video that isn't yours. Like, we're in there responding to other comments too. And if we're getting notifications about that, like, we can just respond straight from the notification. And it's like it's not that hard, but it's so funny because it happens kind of a lot. Like, why do you keep responding? Like, why do you keep coming back? Why did you take the time to comment on a video that isn't even yours just to try and feel better? Like, your actions are going to get a response. There are consequences to your actions, not positive or negative, but there's going to be responses always.
Today I will be playing the part of the brick wall that is life. And that's kind of how it feels like. And that's it. It's like, well, get a life. It's like, dude, I do this full time. This is my life. Happy to be here for you. And I'll actually tell them now, like when it starts getting out of control and you know that they're just going to keep going. And you're just like, I just want you to know that from here on in, I'm just watching for the entertainment. Because it's no longer an argument. Like it's no longer a conversation. Now it's just attack after attack after attack. And of course, if they're attacking you, where does that come from? Insecurity. And so you just point out, you're really showing that insecurity. And then like, oh, now you're attacking me. It's like, it's not an attack if it's fucking obvious. The fact that you don't like that it's obvious doesn't stop it from being obvious. And that's it. I don't like that. I don't want to look at that. Right. And that's all it is. One of my favorite comments, we discussed this earlier before we started recording, was the individual who's like, I think that you are downplaying the role of the weather and these disorders. And I just wrote back, well, isn't it funny that you're downplaying our ability to heal from them? All of a sudden, you could almost hear the short circuit. Like, I don't understand. Right. Because you don't want to. See, that's most of the case when you go and you look at those arguments. It's not that what we're saying isn't clear. It's that they don't like it, which is why you often get the response. And this is my favorite one. I think one of them. Where's the nuance? Why aren't you guys adding more nuance? Why is this so black and white? This 60-second clip that clearly at the end says, go and check out the full discussion. Here's where it is. You should be catering to everybody. It's like, nobody's ever going to do that. And you'll notice, though, that's what it is. You should be catering to me. You should be catering to my triggers. You should be catering to what bothers me. It's like, it's funny. We're actually here talking about responsibility. It's interesting that you should bring that up.
Oh, man. It's incredible entertainment. And just the back and forth that people have and the roundabout nature of it. Just like even the thought of, I don't know, like, I guess if you're commenting on a video pointing something out that's obvious, it makes sense to comment on another video just to point it out. But to go on someone's video and comment something like very aggressive with no intention of just like pointing something out, just to self-soothe, like it takes a very fascinating type of person to do that and spend a lot of time and continue going back and forth. Like there's a, I don't know, a very aggressive, insecure, like certain nature to that.
Yesterday, somebody actually went out of their way. They were so upset with me, and I told you about this. They left numerous comments on numerous of your videos, telling you to never have me on the podcast again. Never have this guy on the podcast again. He's just trash. And what was interesting is that not only did they go to your videos and apparently sent you a direct message, which you told me earlier, they went to somebody else's video, somebody else entirely, and another account that neither you nor I have anything to do, and they tagged you in a comment to tell you about how trash my account is on another video that has nothing to do with us. I just wanted to toss that in there because it backs up what you're saying.
Really, it's just incredible the lengths that people will go to validate a point of view that they can just question. And even just the unwillingness to question something that you believe to be the truth. I guess that's just a mechanism of holding on to myself and my perspective and my idea of myself. Like it's all a mechanism of that. And I guess it stems from like a lack of faith in yourself and an unwillingness to have just do it yourself and like be free in yourself and just make decisions for yourself here and now in the moment with the sensitivity to what's happening. like I've been really trying to here and there put myself in the shoes of someone, in if I'm reading a comment like that, really trying to feel like why someone would do that. And I especially um yesterday, one of my best friends from high school got married and went to the wedding, and it was at a Catholic church, and it was just interesting, very very interesting to watch. The priest was extreme, like everyone was very uncomfortable because he came from a sect of Catholicism that was like a little more old school, a little more closer to by the book. And like the bride was, I talked to her afterwards and she was like, I was seething. I was seething during that because he was like asking them questions during the homily as they're like sitting up at the front by the altar. Like, what's this is a funny one. There's so many fucking funny things that you'll laugh a lot at. But yeah, he asked him how do you be the best wife? And he like waited for her response. And I don't even know what she said, but they were like 20 feet away. And it was very interesting. And he said, you be more feminine. And then he said, Tommy, how do you be a good husband? You be like Jesus and you be masculine. That was straight up what he said. Straight up what he said. And I'm like, I'm in the back row with my friend who's not religious at all either, just like biting my lips, like laughing at first, but then I kind of shifted and I was like, why would someone like have this perspective? Like, why would someone hold on to this point of view so tightly and the right way? And another side of it was just like these are two people getting married. A priest is giving him advice who's probably hasn't been in a relationship maybe in his entire life, advice on how to be a good husband and wife. And like she is a very hardworking, like just awesome person. And he was talking about these situations that were just incredibly presumptive of, when you guys are married and, you have a few kids, like how are you going to act when, you know, Tommy gets home and maybe he's after a hard day's work and, you're home with the kids, taking care of them. And, Tommy just he wants to sit down and have a beer or something. And it's like, are you gonna prioritize yourself? Or are you gonna, be there for your wife? And are you gonna be there for him? Maybe when he comes back and he's, had a tough day, you're gonna be there to support him. And it's like, that's just a massive assumption of how they're gonna live their life. Like, that's insane to assume that those situations are going to play out. And he just kept talking about situations that would play out in their future, after they have a few kids. And this assumption of their roles in the relationship. Like, wife is definitely going to be, home taking care of the kids. And husband's definitely going to go to work every day and then come home, maybe a little stressed out all the time. And another one was he said, he asked them, how are you going to maintain your relationship over the years? And waited. I couldn't hear the responses because I was towards the back, but he waited for them to respond. And he was like, how you maintain a relationship, maintain a marriage throughout, you go to church every week. You go to church every week. Prioritize God because if you're going to church together, prioritizing God in the relationship, then you'll definitely, stick together because God is involved in the relationship. And it was all like prioritizing God, loving God. Through loving God, you love your husband or your spouse or your wife. It's through that it happens. And it was the most disempowering thing I had ever heard in my life since the last pastor I've talked about in the past at our family friend's funeral service thing. It's just the disempowerment is incredible in religion, in Catholicism. It's mind blowing how disempowering all of it is. It's this underlying assumption that you can't do it yourself. you can't do it yourself. You can't be whole in yourself. You're wrong without God. You're incomplete without Jesus. It's this just crazy disempowering idea. And it was brutal. And then cherry on top that I apparently, which I couldn't hear everything. It was like kind of spotty. He had a microphone on, but some of the stuff I didn't hear. And he said before communion, he was like, if you're not Catholic, if you haven't gone, he said something like, if you haven't gone to confession within the last month, please do not come up. I didn't hear that part. So I was like, all right, everyone's getting up. I kind of feel like stretching my legs a little bit. It was a really long fucking mass because his homily was like 35 minutes of just going in circles about all of these assumptions. So I went up, and I didn't mean to do this necessarily, but he said body of Christ, and I had my hand out. I said, thanks. I didn't say amen. And he was like giving it to me. And then he pulled it back and he was like, what was that? I was like, I don't want to make a fucking scene here. I was just like, amen. And I took it and ate it. But apparently, and I talked to people after, because people in the front row and some of the groomsmen who were in it, like they saw that go down and they could hear it. And so they were laughing afterwards because people were kind of going crazy about how absurd that dude was. And apparently there was a couple other people who just straight up forgot what to say behind it. Like I kind of knew that you're supposed to say amen, but I just like I was taking it very casually. I was like, I kind of want a cracker. I'm a little hungry and I want to walk around a little bit. But some people like forgot what to say, and he was like getting frustrated with them. He was so goddamn serious and intense and assumptive, and just thinking there's this objective right way to live, correct way, and you don't know what it is. I think a fighter jet just flew over this house right now, but yeah, it was. So anyway, it was hilarious. It was unreal. It was just incredible to watch, because that's, I think a lot of priests these days, people are used to kind of people coming up with the times a little bit, and he just had none of that. He was very much by the book. It's like, this is what you guys believe. Like, this is it. And it makes people so uncomfortable because a lot of them were Catholic, and it's kind of pointing out like the ridiculousness of it. And there's a way of avoiding it when you don't really look at it, or things don't seem that extreme. But when it's the extreme end of it in front of you, it's like, oh, this is kind of silly.
Yeah, this motherfucker is molding the youth. Just want you to take that in. This is the person who is influencing your children. And what's worse is that he's not actually that much of a rarity. I grew up with motherfuckers like that. Like, it's so interesting because, again, I grew up Roman Catholic in a very French Canadian part of Canada, and it was old school Catholicism. It was exactly that. Like, it was always very serious. It was always very, very much about the ceremony and about the importance of the priest, the importance of the institution, the importance of the building, the importance of the book, all of that shit. So little of it was the importance of God, right? Except through all of those things. And so, yeah, they take themselves super seriously. And who doesn't want that position where you get to scold everyone for not living up to what you've been taught is the right way to live? And you're backed up by an institution that's like, it's totally the right way to live. Right. And that's it. But it's true. It is kind of jarring when you get to see it up front, because often we just kind of turn a blind eye, or we'll leave church like that and we'll go, well, fuck, at least that's over. And then we don't go back for months. But other people are still taking that shit from that guy. If he wasn't a priest, if he was just some asshole standing on a street corner yelling at people, would you not say something eventually? Like, at some point, we'd be like, somebody should do something, no? Right? But because he's standing at the front of a church, right, and has been educated about God, somehow everybody takes him super seriously. And I still find that fucking hilarious. Just the idea that you've gone to school, seminary, to learn about a book that talks about an interpretation of God, and now you're out there saying that you know God. But we will gloss over things that don't justify what we're doing, and we will hold on to things that do. Like, people like holding on to the idea of being Christian because to them, on the surface, that sounds like a good person. Religion helps you find the right path. It builds community. I mean, it gives you a moral code, does all that other shit. It's like, right, and teaches you irresponsibility and teaches you to vilify everybody that doesn't agree with you, teaches you, not form community unless those people like have your state of mind, have your beliefs. Like, there's a lot to it, but we don't want to look at that. We want to look at the positives, right? This is why I find it really funny that once upon a time, somebody saying, Jim's a God-fearing Christian, you would have been like, oh shit, I want to work with Jim. Just because that was the assumption about Christianity, because everybody was fucking Christian. Right now, somebody's like, Jim's a God-fearing Christian. And if you're not Christian, which is often the case now, or if you're not a hardcore Christian, you're going to be a little bit put off. You're going to be like, what's he afraid of exactly? That seems a little weird. Seems a little paranoid, Jim. That kind of thing. And it's true, because you start to recognize that these institutions are based on a mentality that's really catering to fear, catering and perpetuating fear and irresponsibility, which is what gave rise to the institution to begin with. Right. And so it keeps itself in business.
Yeah. Oh man. It's so what hold on. I was reading some of the comments. What was one of the last things you said? Because I like that and I had a thought about that. It was something
Great
about
question.
yeah. I was like the thought just went through and then I was like, oh, that's good. Oh, fuck. And it's gone. And here we
I
are.
go
But
through that all the time. Well, you think about it for a second. And while I have a moment, I just wanted to remind everybody that two things. We may be doing a Vancouver mini retreat on October 5th. We haven't decided yet, but if you would like to join us, check out dualisticunity.com/Vancouver. It's not an order form. It's just an interest form. You fill in your name and your email address. Let us know whether you're absolutely willing to go or just 75%-ish sure that you can go. And if we decide to do this event, then we will let you know. And if you can't make it, then that's just fine as well. But do let us know if there's any interest. We have about 5 people that have expressed that they would like to go. We need a few more. So it would be great if we could have, say, 10 or so people who are interested and 7 of those who are absolutely going to go. That would be awesome. So if you can, check it out, dualisticunity.com/Vancouver. That said, we also have the Netherlands retreat coming up. November 11th to November 19th. This is going to be the last 9-day full Dualistic Unity retreat experience until next fall. We will not be doing our April Australia retreat as planned. Instead, we're going to be doing a mini retreat at an undisclosed location. So if you'd like to know the details of that, do check us out on Patreon, patreon.com/dualisticunity. The QR code for the Netherlands retreat is on the screen right now. Check it out. This is going to be an awesome event. We have a chef. We have 34 community members that are going to be here. We have a wood-fired hot tub. The grounds are amazing. You can check out the details on the website. I won't get too much into it here, but the point is that there are still tickets available. Though most of the third floor shared spaces have been taken, there are still semi-private rooms. Those rooms all have their own bathrooms, so there is a certain degree of privacy. If this is the kind of place, or if you're looking for somewhere to be vulnerable and authentic and still have some space to yourself, as well as a really good group of people to talk to you when you want to be sociable and with people, this is the event. 34 community members. The Dualistic Unity community has been growing for a long time. If you've been on our Discord or in our group events, this is something you're not going to want to miss.
Yeah, it's going to be just an incredible time, and the 9 days really are, as much as the 5-day ones are, the mini retreats are incredible. Like the 9 days are really, you're looking for a shift or just a time to hang with people who are just willing to have a good time and realize that that's a way you can live. You can bring that into every component of your life. Like that's what responsibility, the beauty of responsibility is that there aren't things that are objectively awful. We have certain narratives about certain things, but when you realize that, oh, this is a way that I can live my life, like you can bring that back into family life. You can bring that back into work life. You can bring that back into any situation. The realization, oh, I can be a little bit less serious about this. I can be a little bit more playful about just living life. Like you can have fun with it, even when the situation may be more serious. And I think the retreats are a great way just to see that and see that it's a possibility, and then bring it into your life. So I have no idea what I was thinking before, but that's perfectly okay. And I've a number I had like a bunch of things that I came into this one wanted to talk about, but I guess the one I'll go to is just the recognition, and you've talked about this a number of times, that with that day that you know woke up or had that realization, is you've always said it's you realize that you'd never lived for you. And I never really I knew what you meant, sort of, but it wasn't until recently. It's like, holy fuck. Going through concern, fear, anything is prioritizing someone else. Like, it smacked me in the face so fucking hard. It was a couple days ago. Maybe I was sitting on the I think I was on the plane. I flying to Chicago. It was a morning flight. And I took an edible. That's been something that I've been enjoying just because it's like kind of uncomfortable, but it's the balance. It's a fun time, and it's a little bit uncomfortable, but as long as you're willing to just relax through it, it's fine. It's almost always our fight, our resistance to the situation. So I've been doing that. I don't know, the last couple of flights I've taken usually it's just 10 milligram gummy for it. And so I was sitting on the plane, and I was having I think I filmed some clips for a vlog throughout that day, and it was actually before I brought my phone up and, like, sang a little bit in the airport. It was on the flight, and I just took a little clip, and there was a discomfort in I think I was, like, filming the whole aisle, and I was towards the front of the plane, and there was a discomfort there, and I was like, "Why do I feel uncomfortable doing certain things?" Like, there's a prioritization of other people and what they're thinking, and so it kinda went hand in hand with the realization that I can't know what they're thinking. Like, I don't know if I'm uncomfortable thinking like, "Oh, these people will probably judge me for doing this." I'm just fucking judging myself. I'm just judging myself for doing it. That's all it fucking is, because I don't know. Everyone who sees me filming something could be like, "Oh, that's really cool. Oh, I wonder what that's all about. Oh, I wonder, maybe I'll be in if that goes up as a video, maybe I'll be in it. That'll be cool." It's like, that could easily be the response that everyone has to doing that. So if I'm uncomfortable thinking people are going to judge me for doing something, it's only because I'm judging myself for doing it. And so it hit me like, oh, so I can just live for myself. Like, I can just do that. And it's not like a selfish undertone. It is in a sense, but it's also not. It's just there's just so much less weight when you're living for you, and how often the uncomfortable feelings, the fear, the concern comes from living for someone else, living for someone else's experience that you can't even know. You can't even see their perspective. You can't even fully grasp their perspective necessarily. You only know yours. You only know your perspective. That's what your entire experience is filtered through your perspective. So your assumptions about what other people are doing are coming from you always. And so when you actually take in the willingness to live for yourself, for your experience, like, things get they both get very it's like it felt almost like I was alone in a vacuum in a very, very freeing way, or it was close to a dream type feeling, but I was sitting, and this was on the plane, I was sitting there. It's like, I don't know anything about this situation right now. It's all just my assumption, and I don't have to prioritize anyone else's perspective that I'm just assuming. Like, I can just live for me, and it's funny because even saying it, I I know the words never do it justice in regards to the feeling, because you've said it a bunch and it never resonated whatsoever. So there's also, in even just as I'm saying that, there's an irrelevancy to the words that's freeing in a sense. Like I can just talk and I can just say stuff and everyone's going to take it differently, see it differently, hear it differently. So I can just keep saying shit and just keep doing shit and everyone's going to do their thing with it, take it in whatever way. I can't know how it's being taken. I can't know, but if I can actually I can just prioritize living for me, which is such a it's a groundbreaking realization, but it's also so basic. Like it's so fundamental. It's like you can just live your life for you. You can prioritize your own experience. And yet it's so mind-blowing
And it's
to a
in
sense.
everyone else's best interest. Isn't that funny? Is that it's actually in everyone else's best interest because now you're being authentic. Now you're being honest. Now you're actually going to be able to be honest because you're doing so for you. Right? Like that's the whole thing about living relative to everyone else is that it's all just you. And if somebody does judge you, you know as well as I do that more often than not, it's because of them judging themselves. Otherwise, they wouldn't judge you. Right? And if somebody does have an issue with anything you do and they bring it up to you, that's an opportunity for you to once again discern whether or not this is something that you're actually causing a consequence. There's something that you're doing, or if this person's just trying to self validate. But the whole point is that it always comes back to you. It's not about whether or not they want you to do something. You still have to discern where that shit's coming from. Right? You still get to decide whether or not you're going to do it or not. And that's the whole thing. You know, to not be a people pleaser doesn't mean that you don't love people, right? If anything, not being a people pleaser is how you love people.
Yeah, being a people pleaser is kind of incredibly selfish sense. Like you're in prioritizing yourself from a selfish perspective in the sense that you're prioritizing how you feel all the time and you do things and you're using other people as an excuse to just feel better about yourself. Oh, I'm a people pleaser because you don't feel good if someone isn't responding in a certain way. And so it's this incredibly limited way of experiencing things and kind of handcuffs you from just being yourself, just living for you, just for the sake of living for you, because that's where the freedom lies. Like it's really kind of trippy in a way to do that, to realize that I can just live for myself. I don't have to consider the potential response that someone may have to a thing. And and that combined with the recognition of uncertainty and I've always thought of it like until recently as a future thing. But when you're uncertain, when you recognize uncertainty right now, everything becomes very dreamlike. Like it becomes because it's not what you think. And so if you recognize that you can just live for you and you're in uncertainty all the time, it's like things get very interesting. And I was saying I was at this wedding yesterday and I'm like a little bit banged up this morning, but really not that bad. Like I'm not very hungover at all because I was mixing in waters and just having a good time because I've been so much more aware of the impacts of alcohol and drinking too, and the reasons for it. And that was another thing I was like thinking about leading up to this was just the willingness to look at it because a while, like when I've talked about, high school, was feeling certain things, which is just so interesting that those were all just assumptions too. And I don't know how people saw me back then. Like even a little bit, it's all just how I see myself. Like, oh, people probably think this. Like, no, fucker, that's just how you saw yourself throughout it. And there wasn't anything wrong with it, but you don't know how you were perceived then. And so it was all this self-created weight. And then going into college, I was like, oh yeah, I kind of, naturally got better. I just drank more. Like there was such a drinking culture in college. And So in situations that there had the potential for certain feelings to come up, it was just out use alcohol. That's the shortcut as opposed to facing it. So now, and even just more recently, I'm noticing it. So I've gone out, like when I was in New York a couple weeks ago, went out with friends a few times, like going to this, went out, and I'm not like I'm being very particular with how much. A lot of it is, well, partially because you don't want to be a fucking jackass, but it's also prioritizing just like not wanting to wake up feeling like a bag of shit, and like I have other things that I want to do, and things I enjoy doing, and even just like all this stuff, not feeling terrible going into it, is an obvious reason. But with that, it's like I'm noticing, oh, there's some discomfort here. But then there's the opportunity when you're feeling that to be like, oh yeah, but this is all fucking uncertain right now. All of the assumptions that I'm making of how I'm being looked at or perceived or whatever are just my own assumptions. Even, and I noticed this yesterday, like I I was like on the dance floor and I really enjoy dancing, but and part of it is because I have been told by people that I'm a shitty dancer. And so that is something that accumulates over time. And I've realized those things too, that like, oh, there was a couple times where I was told that, and that has, I don't know, made me more rigid with things, because a lot of dancing and being a decent dancer is, even just a decent dancer is just your willingness to not think that you're bad and just do it. It's not about doing good moves or having all the right stuff. It's just the willingness to do it for yourself. Like dance for yourself, for your experience. And so yesterday at the wedding, like I didn't drink that much, so it wasn't like all just, liquid courage, but I was out there doing like dancing for a long time, and there were times where it wasn't necessarily super comfortable, and in the past when I felt that, I would have just gotten another drink. That's like crazy that that's a typical response throughout society when you're feeling a little bit of discomfort, as opposed to, but instead of doing that, like, and I did have some drinks. I wasn't totally sober necessarily, but there was still those feelings arising. But when they did, and I didn't do that, and I instead shifted my perspective or remembered, like, oh yeah, but I don't know that. Oh yeah, but I don't know. And something that I've noticed in the past that has made me insecure is when I'm dancing and someone like does the same dance move, I'm like, oh, they're making fun of me. But what I realized yesterday was that I do that, and there's like a mirroring of, and it's like a human behavior thing that people mirror what they see. And when someone's not really sure what to do, they'll just do what they're seeing. And so I noticed myself with someone else doing it, and it hit me like the floodgates were open. When someone does that, it's like a lot of people are uncomfortable when they're dancing. Like there's a lot of aversion to that. And I was like, holy shit. So when someone does that, they could easily just be uncomfortable and looking for something to do that's certain because someone else is doing it. So that's an okay thing to do. I always thought, oh, they're making fun of me. It's only because I fucking judge myself. So anyway, when I started doing it just for me, for my experience, I was like, this is a really fun thing. And this is a blast, and I'm having a good time. And I was just doing it for myself. And it like changed everything. And then when it hit me like, oh, all these people, like I knew a lot of people there, like they're all uncertain. Like I don't actually know them or what they're thinking or what they're feeling inside. And immediately it got like very, very dreamlike. So anyway, I know we're close to time, but it was, yeah, it's just, yeah, life's interesting, man.
Yeah, it's interesting how much of our life is distorted by this perception of our, I guess, division from other people, which is really division from ourselves, right? Like that fear of other people that we feel is really just the fear of our own judgment, right? And so it does change. It does become more dreamlike. It really does. And again, I'm looking forward to doing the commentary on season 1, because a lot of this just starts to settle over time. And I guess that's the reason the conversation is so helpful, as well as the community. The group discussions are great for this, because everybody's kind of just peeling away layers one at a time. I just spent so long on the other extreme end that all of a sudden for me, it all just kind of unraveled. in one experience, and I've been trying to figure out how to explain it ever since. So it's a lot of fun for me, but I understand how jarring it can be. Absolutely. It's somebody once described it to me as having the eyelid ripped off of your third eye. It's like, you can't unsee this now. Everyone, we are going to continue on for the next 3 hours on Patreon. Tier 2 call first, tier 3 call right after that. Patreon.com/dualistic unity. This is our quote unquote Sunday sermon day. So if you can join us, we'd love to see you. Otherwise, we will be back tomorrow morning, 11:30 a.m. Eastern time, for another episode of Dualistic Unity Raw. Take care, everyone.